So we're going to quickly run through the social equity individual applicant eligibility verification request checklist. This is the form that will be on the front of each requester's packet, regardless of whether or not they get verified for the program. So everybody who submitted a request, we will complete this checklist, and then it will be the document uploaded to their user profile. For folks that ultimately submitted documentation, we will be including that documentation behind this checklist. And then for folks that, of course, didn't submit documentation, it most likely will just be the checklist that gets uploaded. And of course, if they didn't submit documentation, we're not going to be able to verify them under Municipal Code Section 10420B1. And that's the Municipal Code section that has the expanded eligibility criteria. So as we're running through this form, the requester's name will go up here. Their unique ACA reference ID will go in this box over here. This is the reference ID that's unique to the user, and we'll be uploading this checklist and the supporting documentation to their ACA user account, and then making the appropriate selection on the user account, whether or not they've been verified under the expanded criteria. So there are 3 criteria, and we'll quickly go through all of them. The default for the questions is no, and that was intentional, so that the analyst that is working on it will have to take an affirmative action to click the box and then change it over to yes. So there's a drop-down menu here. You can see that the little arrow is here. If you click it up to yes and you click on yes, it'll change the answer to yes. So there's only 2 selections for each of these questions. It's either yes or a no. If we select yes here, then we'll go ahead and we'll mark the penal code section, the location, and the date. This is information that we did request the users to include as part of their request intake form, and they may or may not have completed those fields. If they did not complete the fields, but they uploaded some document, you'll need to go through the document to look for a penal code section that could result in them being verified under this criteria. Of course, if they did take the time to fill out those sections, it'll make it easier when you look at their criminal history or the ticket that they may have submitted to identify the qualifying penal code section, the location, and the date that it occurred to determine whether or not it meets the criteria to be eligible for this. So what we're looking for is the requester has to provide some form of government documentation. It could be a ticket, it could be a court documentation, it could be a probation order. It needs to be something tangible that we can verify that includes the person's name, the penal code section they were cited under, the location that it occurred at, and a date. Only California cannabis arrests or convictions that occurred prior to November 8th, 2016 count. So if somebody was cited for unlicensed commercial cannabis activity earlier this year, that's not going to be a qualifying California cannabis arrest or a conviction for the purposes of the social equity program. So the date is critical. The location is critical because it had to have occurred in the state of California. It could have been any law enforcement agency that cited the person for the cannabis-related offense, but it did have to occur in the state of California. And then, of course, the penal code section is important because violations of Proposition D, which are a land use violation for engaging in existing medical marijuana dispensary activities at a location that was not authorized for it, is effectively a zoning violation, and it's a misdemeanor. So it's not something that will qualify somebody for this particular criteria, and it's also related to our municipal code section. As I discussed with Corey yesterday, a violation of Proposition D does not disqualify them from participating in the program. It just can't be used to meet this criteria. So if somebody was convicted of violating Proposition D and they were convicted of running a drug house that included commercial cannabis activity, then the running the drug house that involved cannabis, marijuana, whatever it was called at that point in time that they were cited, would be something that could meet this criteria as long as it's associated with the requester and it happened before November 8th, 2016. And as Aaron pointed out, any law enforcement agency, including the federal agencies, can be used so long as the arrest was made in California. So somebody who got off an airplane and was cited either by airport police, TSA, or a federal agency at LAX, the Drug Enforcement Agency has done raids in the state of California. As long as the violation occurred within the state of California, it may be able to qualify for this program. Gidget, go ahead.
Can you repeat the message that you conveyed about the land use, and how would we look, or where would we look on the ticket that does not qualify?
Sure. So under the code, violations of Proposition D, which is a Los Angeles Municipal Code section, do not qualify as this criteria. So when we kind of do the more in-depth version, we'll already call out what the what the municipal code sections were for Proposition D, so that you know that those wouldn't count. And Corey and I were discussing yesterday of just kind of putting together the common penal code sections that would qualify, so that analysts have a quick reference checklist. And then of course, if it's not something on the quick reference checklist, we'll have to check the penal code section to see what it's related to. There are penal code sections that are definitely tied to marijuana or cannabis. And then there's kind of generic penal code sections, which is anything that's a Schedule I drug. And unless the ticket or the court order or something has something that links it to cannabis or marijuana, we're not going to be able to use it. But we can definitely get into that a little bit more in depth once we get through the checklist. I do intend to have Corey assign a few of these to me so that I can do a training with the team and we can go through it and I can fill it out based on my review of it, and I can show everybody the tools that they could rely upon to fill out this checklist. And that was the training that Corey was mentioning earlier.
Gotcha. Thank you.
You're welcome. So we would fill out these fields based on the information provided by the requester. And then of course, this question is important, is as the analyst, do you believe the requester met the criteria for this eligibility selection based on the information and documents they submitted? Yes or no? So they could have marked yes, not provided you any documentation. Therefore, they said yes to the question. However, based on your review, they don't meet the criteria because they didn't upload sufficient information or documentation to demonstrate that they meet this criteria. So it's okay to have like a yes, no here. They could have marked no, but they could have uploaded a ticket, and based on your review of the ticket, they could meet this criteria. So just their actual response to the yes, no questions shouldn't cloud your judgment as you review the documents. If you see documents that could be used to meet the criteria, I need you to review it. And if you feel that the documentation does meet the criteria, even if they said no to that particular criteria, you need to be responding truthfully here so that, you know, folks can get verified. Not everybody, for the folks that participated in the 2019 review, not everybody is going to do a complete job filling this out. And it's our duty to look at the documentation to try to determine whether or not they meet the eligibility criteria, regardless of how they filled out the questionnaire. The documentation is the critical piece here, not how they responded to the questionnaire. Does anybody have any questions about that? So moving on to income, again, first question is going to be whether or not they submitted something related to the tax information. So it could be their tax return. It could be the IRS form that says they were a non-filer for tax year 2020 or 2021. We're looking at tax year 2020 and 2021. So if they uploaded a 2018 tax return, that tax return may be documentation for residency in a disproportionately impacted area, but we can't use it to meet the low income and asset attestation criteria. Then of course, the thresholds for income for each of the tax years is going to be different. So it's important to identify here on this form which tax year they were trying to be verified as low income for, because the the amounts that will be used will be different based on the tax year. It'll be different based on their household size. The forms that they submitted are going to be critical. If they were a non-filer, the assumption is that they didn't make sufficient income to submit a tax return. So of course, then the reported gross income is going to be zero. So as long as their assets don't exceed the threshold, then they would go ahead and be able to be verified. However, the thresholds, of course, are set based on their household size and their HUD set thresholds. So somebody could be a non-filer for 2020 and 2021. They're an actor and they own 5 homes. Their primary home doesn't have to be reported as an asset, but the other 4 homes would be. And even though they didn't earn any income for that year, they may have assets that exceed the threshold for their household size, and therefore they're not going to be eligible to be verified under this criteria because their assets exceed the income threshold. And the income threshold for assets is 4 times whatever the income limit is for their household size. Any questions? And again, we'll be doing a more in-depth training. This is really to run folks through the checklist to see if people have questions about the checklist. This top line here is the information that they submit: tax year, household size, what form did they submit, what income was reported. And then these bottom lines are going to be filled out based on the HUD income chart, based on the household size. So if it's a household of 1, the income limit is going to be different than if it was a household of 8. So this is going to be whatever the HUD limit is for their specific household size for that tax year. And then for the asset limitations, it's 4 times whatever their income limit is. So if this was $100,000 here, we would put $400,000 in this box, and those would be the guidelines that we use to review their documentation to see if they meet this eligibility criteria. Unlike 2019, we are taking into account assets so that folks that are not, that may be considered low income from an income standpoint for a particular year, don't have the ability to participate if they do have assets that exceed the thresholds. And that could be because they're an actor, they're a professional athlete, and they sat out a year due to COVID, they didn't work due to COVID, but they are in fact not low income based on the asset amounts. And that's similar to what the federal government uses for some of their programming. Elvin. Elvin, if you're trying to talk, you're on mute, but go ahead and jump in.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, you can hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, I was wondering, do all applicants have to submit the asset attestation form, and is that part of the requirement to meet the income? Because we know that some of them didn't submit that form.
The answer is yes. So in order to meet the income, they have to provide documentation that they're low income for calendar year 2020 or 2021, and they have to provide the asset attestation form. If they provided tax records but no asset attestation, unfortunately, they didn't submit the sufficient documentation to meet this criteria. And as you can see here for question number 2, it's either yes or no. They either submitted the form and the form was complete and the net assets were at or below 4 times their income threshold. But if they didn't submit the asset attestation form, a no in this box is fatal for this criteria. There's no way for them to be verified. It'll automatically mean that the answer for number 3 is also no. In order for number 3 to be a yes, these 2 things are going to have to also be a yes as you do the review. Any other basic questions about the checklist before we move into the third category? So the third and final criteria that somebody could submit documentation for is residency in a disproportionately impacted area. They had to demonstrate 10 or more years of residency, and they had to provide documentation. Generally, we require one document for each qualifying year. There are certain documents, like a letter from the Department of Water and Power, that shows that they were the ratepayer at that household for an extended period of time. That would be an example where one document could be used to satisfy all 10 years. As we fill out this form, you will have to indicate the police reporting district that the provided address was found in, and it's going to have to be one of the police reporting districts that is included in the expanded study. As we go through some tangible examples, we'll actually look at the licensing map online, which has a layer with all of the qualifying police reporting districts. So all you have to do is go to our online map, type in the address, and see whether or not it falls within one of the pink police reporting districts. If it does, the map has the police reporting district number there, so you can go ahead and quickly type it into this document. For example, if they had that DWP letter, you do have to fill this entire table out. The police reporting district, of course, will be the same, so you just copy and paste it in that column. The dated document will still be the same. It'll be a letter from the Department of Water and Power. You'll go ahead and add whatever date is on that document, and then you can show the qualifying years, and it'll be whatever that range is that's listed on the actual letter. So this form is really intended so that if somebody has questions about whether or not somebody does meet the individual criteria, at a glance, an analyst, a supervisor, a manager can just pull this checklist up and see what the analyst said without having to go through all of the supporting documentation. Of course, as this goes through the review chain, supervisors will be reviewing this to make sure that the analyst got it right, but we want one document that kind of at a glance can tell us what the story is for a particular requester. Does anybody have any questions about the residency piece at this time? Okay, so moving on, we go down to the reviewer summary. So the form is going to be, the documentation will be reviewed by somebody within the DCR team. It's not necessarily going to be a licensing analyst. And for these types of things, we always do dual verification. So once it's been reviewed by someone, somebody else is going to go through and also do the verification and the review to make sure that they concur with the analyst's findings. If there is a question about whether or not there's a concurrence or whether or not something meets the criteria, it'll get bumped up to a supervisor or a manager, and then we'll be the tiebreaker. Otherwise, if both analyst or an analyst and a supervisor feel that the requester has met the criteria or has not met the criteria, it could move forward. For things where we feel that they have met the criteria, then of course, those are things that'll be spot checked by the supervisors, Elvin and Corey. For things where we don't feel that they meet the criteria, those will be spot checked by a manager, including myself. So if we're going to tell somebody no, we want to make sure that we get the no's correct the first time around. And of course, the people that didn't submit any documentation are going to be an easy review for the no, but I will be the one who ultimately needs to testify in any challenges to that instead of the analyst. And we will be challenged on this process, so I do my best to kind of insulate analysts from having to deal with that. Go ahead, Gidget.
So this is a question that came up for the technical assistance webinar, and I just wanted to verify that there really isn't an appeals process per se. Is that true?
That is correct. DCR's determination is final and it's not appealable. So anything where we feel that they're not going to meet the criteria will go through my desk, and I will go through it with a fine-tooth comb before we update the user's profile to not verified. But you know, once I've done my review and made the final determination, they don't get to appeal to Michelle, they don't get to appeal to the commission, they don't get to appeal to the city council. All they can do at that point is take a writ against the city, which is why my fingers will be the last ones on that document for when we say no, because I'll ultimately be the subject matter expert for any depositions or litigation that come out of this process.
Thanks.
So before in 2019, we had a whole bunch of different selections, tier 1, tier 1, tier 2, tier 2. We've simplified the process. If you meet 2 out of the 3 criteria, you're verified as a social equity individual applicant under LAMC 10420B1, and you have the opportunity to participate in our licensing application processes as a social equity individual applicant. If they met the eligibility criteria for the California cannabis arrest or conviction, then they'll be able to participate in round 2. So if somebody got verified under B and C, you would just check this box. If somebody got verified under A and B or A and C or A, B, C, that means you would check both of the boxes, because there's going to be a different selection through the portal that indicates that they did have that qualifying cannabis arrest or conviction, which will be the key for them to register for the phase 3 retail round 2 lottery. And then of course, if somebody did not meet the criteria, you just go ahead and check this box. So for all of the folks that submitted a request but didn't upload documentation, this is going to be the box that gets checked at the bottom, and this is what's going to be uploaded to their user profile. Again, we will be doing a more in-depth presentation. I will be going through some real examples and filling this form out based on the information submitted, and that training will be forthcoming. If you have the opportunity to do it later this morning, we'll go ahead and get it done once you're done with the eligibility verification for the actual applications. Otherwise, we'll just schedule some time either later today or later this week to kind of go through it. Aaron.
If someone doesn't pass the first requirement, the conviction requirement, are we required to go through the rest of the form still, or should we still complete the whole form?
Yeah, you have to complete the whole form. So the verification process is for all of our license types and to participate in the social equity program. It's not just limited to phase 3 retail round 2. So somebody who wants to pursue delivery, cultivation, they want an opportunity to access the learning management system, they could get verified. And they don't have to have a qualifying conviction to get verified. For the folks that do have the qualifying arrest or conviction, that of course unlocks the ability to participate and register for phase 3 round 2. But if the answer to A is no, keep doing the review to see if the answer to B and C could be yes. And if the answer to A and B is no, I still need you to do the review for C, just so that if they submitted the sufficient documentation for C, they would have peace of mind that whatever their residency stuff was sufficient, and then it's just a matter of them either meeting the criteria for the conviction arrest or the income to ultimately get verified under the expanded criteria. And they would be able to reapply in 2023 or later with that peace of mind. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now, and then I'll jump into the executive team. I'll check with Corey and Elvin to see how things are going with the equity share review. And if it looks like you guys are going to finish with the equity share review early, I'll go ahead and just join that session, start the recording again, and then we can go ahead